Welcome to the 1 Million Years of Joy podcast. I'm Dr. Andrea Benaker, your host, and my intention is to inspire you to find more joy in your life through the stories from our guests and the science on joy and purpose. Saasha, welcome. It's such a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Saasha, when I discovered what you did, I was totally amazed and I said, we absolutely have to bring you on. The more I'm reading about your company, the more I'm inspired. Your mission to combat food waste is incredibly impactful. And since founding Olio in 2016, I understand that your community has spread across 62 countries and 7 million users. And you have been named one of the UK's coolest female founders by Business Insider, which I absolutely love. Can you tell us more about your company and the impact it has had on local communities, please?
So, my co founder and one of my closest friends, Tessa, and we set out with a mission to end food waste. But our mission has evolved a little bit now. It is now to solve the climate crisis by ending waste one share at a time. And essentially, we do that by having a platform, which is app based, which connects anyone with something that they don't need or want with people nearby who may need or want that. It could be food, but it could also be household items. We now have 8 million people who created accounts on the app. And since our inception, we've seen our community share successfully, I think, 160 million portions of food that would have otherwise been thrown away, and about 12 million household items with each other. And the way you do that is really simple. Whatever you have that you're not going to eat or use, you simply use the app to take a photo, add a brief description, and then you click submit. And then that is added to the browse view for your neighbors. And it also sends push notifications to people nearby to let them know that something's available. Things can be given away. All food is given away. Household items can be offered for sale, although the vast majority are given away for free. But we also enable people to lend and borrow everyday things like popcorn makers and step ladders and camping equipment, etc., so that everyone doesn't have to own their own version of everything. We're totally powered by volunteers. We have 160,000 volunteers, and there's two different types of volunteers. There's half of them who go to businesses. Those are called food waste heroes. We put them through a food safety training course, and then they are eligible to claim opportunities at local businesses to collect food that business is going to throw away because it needs to be eaten today. It's got a sell by date today, but it hasn't been sold and it can't be donated to charity, and there's a couple hours left. It just needs to feed a human. So we recruit and train volunteers to collect that food, and they take it to their home and they add it to the app just like they would if it was food that was spare from their own kitchen, and their neighbors come around and pick it up that same day. And then we have another type of volunteer who are called ambassadors, and they're basically spreading the word about Olio and getting people in their community to download the app and sign up and have a proper declutter, go in their homes and look for things that they could be giving away, things that are gathering dust. So these are volunteers are all over the world, as you mentioned in the introduction. We have seen sharing take place successfully in 62 countries. And that's because we've seen volunteers go through the volunteer training and take the initiative in communities all around the world. We ourselves are still a small team. We're a startup. We're still trying to figure out how to scale, trying to figure out how to be profitable and have a sustainable business model. But it is our volunteers that are at the heart of our sort of how we bring new people into the community and how we rescue all this surplus food from business. So that is a very long-winded way of answering your question. Hopefully that helps.
Yes, it's absolutely wonderful. And as a result of growing your business so rapidly over the last couple of years, and particularly with your background working in finance and strategy with Morgan Stanley, McKinsey, American Express, what are some of the challenges and joys that have come along the way with the journey of building your company so far?
That's a good question. I mean, being an entrepreneur in itself, it's such a creative job, and you're constantly problem solving and brainstorming and experimenting. which is all really playful. And it's the kind that I get a lot of joy from, that just that entrepreneurial process. Like, we've got a big challenge, we've got limited resources, we've got a huge sense of urgency because we're trying to solve a problem that we care deeply, deeply about, and we think is really important for the world to solve. And it's like we all muck in, roll up our shirt sleeves, and just it's all about like idea generation and experimentation and hustle, right? And I think it's the grown up version of being a kid in a lot of ways. And so I actually, the job itself is very joyful compared to, I spent about 13 years in the corporate world. And it doesn't mean that I didn't have joy in some of those roles at times, but it's not nearly as playful or creative. I didn't find in the roles that I was in. Um, I think undoubtedly, the most joy I get is in the individuals who are benefiting from Olio, either because they've gotten access to food or household items that they really needed to feed their family or clothe their family or whatnot, and they're really grateful. And often people are a bit down on their luck for a short period of time. And then when they get back on their feet, they're the ones who are our best brand ambassadors. They're the ones who are out there volunteering. But the individual stories of how everyday people are helping each other out, being generous with each other, volunteering their time and energy to make a sharing platform like Olio work, that's hugely motivational. There's a section in the app called the forum, which is, as it sounds, like a newsfeed where people can post different comments, recipes, tips for sustainable living, whatnot. And there's a section called Olio Love. You can, whenever I'm feeling a bit blue, I'll just filter to the Olio Love section and I'll read all of the heartwarming stories, and I am filled with joy because, I'm like, wow, we built something that made this possible. This stranger gave someone some flowers and a card as a thank you because someone helped them out when they needed it. So that's also really joyful. The challenges are many, many, many. It's a marathon, like an endurance marathon, and it can be totally exhausting at times to like care so deeply about something. And really, having a business feels like another child. It feels like your baby. You check to make sure it's breathing all the time, and you just sort of live in this constant fear that something bad's going to happen to it and that it's going to disappear. And so there's a lot of stress associated with, I'm not saying anything that's super unexpected, but yeah, it's a total roller coaster being an entrepreneur. And then that has effects, you can't really plan your own financial future in quite the same way because you don't necessarily know if you're going to have a job next year or the year after or the year after. So there's a lot of uncertainty, and managing that, not letting that, I'm a bit of a control freak, and not letting that uncertainty completely derail my ability to function. And like, it took me a while to get used to that and to like be comfortable, I guess, in living with so much uncertainty. And then the other challenge I would say is that I have a real sense of urgency with regard to the climate crisis. I'm really surrounded by the news of what's going on, and it feels really, really, for me, it's the most important thing that we can work on collectively. And that's just not the case for 9 out of 10 people, right? In fact, it's not even in the top 10 list of most important things for 9 out of 10 people. And there is generally, and it's not just people, but I mean for businesses as well, because we sell our solution into businesses. And so this lack of urgency in the face of what I see as, a really big issue, the climate crisis, can be quite overwhelming at times, quite frustrating. And so being able to celebrate what progress we have made without feeling completely overwhelmed and hopeless about how far we still have to go, and like inhibiting those two parallel yet sort of somewhat contradictory states of being it's also quite a challenge. So it's like managing my own mental like expectations, disappointment slash.
Well, thank you for sharing. And as you were saying, your objective is also to become profitable while having such a massive impact on the communities that you're serving. what is your business model to actually achieve that profitability level that you're aspiring to?
So 90% of our revenues come from our service level agreements with supermarkets and caterers and any type of business that has surplus food. For example, Tesco, which is the largest supermarket here in the UK, they've got 3,000 stores. We have a national partnership with them. And by partnership, I mean they're our biggest client. And that's a 4-year-old partnership. And they pay us to arrange for the redistribution of over 3 million meals from their 3,000 stores every single month to the local community. So we are tens of thousands of times a week recruiting and training and matching volunteers to go to their stores and collect the food that they would have thrown away and then ensure that food is safely redistributed through our app to the local community so that it feeds humans rather than feeding landfill or anaerobic digestion or any other suboptimal downstream waste option. And Tesco cares about that because they have a public commitment to have zero edible food waste. They have net zero targets. You know, they've got their own sort of ESG priorities, and we fit in, and they invest in us as a solution to help them get to their goals. And we have national relationships with other supermarkets. And anyway, cut a long story short is we charge a fee for that, obviously, because we need to account manage that client, and we also need to ensure that thousands of trained, friendly, reliable volunteers are where we said they'd be when they need to be, and that food ends up being safely redistributed. So that's our business model. It's a B2B model. We also have a freemium version of the app where, you know, I don't know, 20 or 30,000 of our users subscribe for a small monthly fee. They can unlock an ad-free experience and get access to an exclusive map view and also get a special supporter profile badge. And that's basically a freemium model.
Beyond the UK, where you've actually started your business and now with the international expansion, what have been some of the lessons learned from your global journey? And how has that influenced your perspective on joy and community from all these international experiences?
I would definitely say that we're not global yet. We have anyone can use the app anywhere, and the app is in English and Spanish, and it's user generated content. So people have been able to use it in many, many different languages. But we have small pockets of communities sort of spread across the world. We do have quite strong sharing communities in Sweden, Singapore, Mexico, Argentina, Ireland, and a few other places, but they're still subscale compared to the UK. There's two answers I would give to that. One is it's remarkably similar well, actually, there's a couple of different things that I've learned. One is the less affluent a country, the more generous people are, and the more aware people are that others are in need. And it's quite interesting to see just how, like in Latin America, for example, the urgency that I was talking about earlier with regard to the climate crisis, it might not be as there for the climate crisis, but with regard to the fact that there are people who are impoverished and that they aren't having potentially their basic needs met, whether that's food or clothing or shelter, there is a real sense of community that is stronger, I think, than we see in the United States and the UK and some other more affluent countries. Another thing we've learned is that the businesses focusing on sustainability is actually, in many parts of the world, 5-10 years behind the UK. So it's just so far down the corporate agenda that there's no targets that are set there, or very limited targets, not aspirational targets. There's certainly not budget to pay for someone like Olio to ensure that they reach these targets that aren't set. And so what we have to sell, there aren't buyers all over the world yet because a lot of markets just aren't focused on sustainability right now.
Great. Well, thank you for sharing. As I'm looking at everything that you have shared, and when you're looking at Olio that relies heavily on the power of sharing and generosity, you mentioned earlier some of the heartwarming stories that you come across. Is there one specific one that you could share with us that has really brought a lot of joy to you and also to someone else's life. And if you wish, it fuels the fire to continue despite some of the challenges that you have shared before.
Well, it would be impossible to pick one story. I mean, there are thousands of stories. We connect people on the doorstep to give away surplus food and household items over 1 million times every month. So there's just countless numbers of stories. We've seen weddings, we've seen, people help house other people when they've been made displaced from their home. We've seen people help find jobs. We've seen people who have been depressed or grieving and haven't left the house in a long time, finding a new sense of purpose through volunteering with Olio. um, I mean, the stories really are countless. I think my favorite stories are often when, because we have a section in the app for wanted, where people can make a wanted request, and someone will put in a request like wanted, some cutlery, some, knives and forks, and someone else will say, oh, I've got some knives and forks, and then they'll get to know each other, and actually the person who wanted some knives and forks, they might be someone who's moving into their own flat for the first time in their lives, and they actually need everything and they have nothing. And the person who is fine has stuff to share ends up helping to like source and project manage and kit out like their entire house or flat. I've seen that more times than I can count, where someone asks for something small and something pretty insignificant, but then the generosity and the what they end up with is 100 times more something, and it blows their mind, right? Like they could never have imagined that there would just be such an outpouring of generosity from whoever it is that they've asked, whatever it is that they've asked for the community. So I sort of love it when the community like rallies around a particular cause for a particular individual, and they've got modest expectations, and then we often see people who are expecting a child for the first time and can't necessarily afford to get all of the new stuff that you need for a newborn. And we see people coming together and sort of swarming to basically say, like, here's everything that you're going to need from a crib to the toys to the whatever, sterilizer to this to that. And all of a sudden they've gone from having next to nothing to having a whole newborn kit. And the gratitude, obviously, that those people are experiencing in that time, such a an emotional and vulnerable time in one's life, bringing a new baby into the world. So unable to give you like Sarah helped Joe, but I do encourage anyone who's interested to subscribe to our newsletter, because every newsletter we feature stories to help make the magic of sharing real.
And you're spreading joy every single day through what you have created. And when we look at where you are today and you look back on where you started, how did the ramp up and the word get out to actually get more people involved and enthusiastic about spreading joy and basically sharing and helping each other out? Can you share some of the insights on how you're able actually to just create that positive momentum that led to the growth that you're seeing today?
Yeah. So it's really what I have now call a community-led growth model. So in the beginning, we gave ourselves sort of 6 months from idea to launch, and we carved out a sort of a corner of North London. And we had very little budget. We were self-funded for the first sort of year. And my co-founder and I, we had little babies, and we basically printed out 10,000 letters, which we hand delivered door to door, telling people to go to a website to be pre-registered to be notified when we launch. And then we went to businesses and we sort of collected unsold food at the end of the day. And then we would stand on the street corner with a clipboard outside of like the tube or in front of the bus stop and just talk to people and get their emails and everything. And we also would put up posters on lamp posts up and down, right? And basically the objective was to get people to sign up. And what we realized is as we were doing that, as we were talking to people on the street, sort of 1 in 10 or 1 in 20 people would say, oh my God, this is so amazing. I hate food waste. Like, how can I help? And we started asking people on a scale of 1 to 10, like, how excited are you about what we're building? And if they said 10, we said, will you help us? And so by the time we launched, we had this whole collection of people who'd said, I'd like to volunteer to help you bring this to life. And that was the beginning of our sort of volunteer program, which is what we have today. Basically, everything that we did in the beginning, which is handing out flyers, putting up posters, we put that all into a step-by-step guide, and we've made it available to anyone who wants to volunteer so that they can replicate what we did in the beginning in their own immediate neighborhood in order to spread the word. And we've sort of automated it so that if you're in the app, you're asked to volunteer, you can claim a volunteering badge, then you sign up to a pathway, then you get basically step-by-step instructions on what to do and how to celebrate that. And we've got a whole separate interface called the Volunteer Hub for volunteers where they can inspire each other and share photos and interact with each other. And they, basically all the best practices to do with volunteer management. And so they're out there on Olio's behalf, feeling ownership for their own food sharing community or their own sharing community. And that's really how we've grown. And then throughout that, we tried to build in as many growth loops as possible. So we ask people to share testimonials. We ask people to share to social. We ask people to share on the forum. We had a volunteer group in Facebook until very recently, just closed it down last month or the month before with 20,000 people in it that were very active. And we only closed it down because we moved it all into our volunteer hub. So I guess the answer to that is that we ask for help. And when you're doing something that people really believe in, people will help you. And I think it's your community is definitely is a superpower. And that's why mission-based businesses, like businesses with true mission, not one that's just tacked on, will find it easier to get volunteers to activate their community, to hire and retain exceptional talent, to get cut through in the press, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that the business case for having a mission-based business sort of it speaks for itself.
Thank you for sharing the way you've actually managed to start. And I absolutely love the 6 months time frame and the conversations that led to the beautiful growth that you're having. And you mentioned earlier that when you actually launched Olio, you were managing the reality of also becoming a mom. And I'm curious to get your views on being a mother, being an entrepreneur with the highs and the lows that you have described earlier. How do you manage to balance those demands and realities? Because, I have two kids and sometimes things get completely crazy and out of control and you need help. But as I said, sometimes it just gets so overwhelming. How do you manage to find joy and fulfillment in playing those two roles, growing your business while also being a mother?
My co-founder and we both have a very similar approach, and I think we sort of call it the integrated approach, in that there's not really any distinction between like work and life. As soon as our kids could walk, they were handing out flyers. I have my 2-year-old learned how to use a laminator to laminate posters. I mean, he probably laminated, I don't even know how many thousands of posters. He absolutely loved it. So we really integrated our children into the entrepreneurial experience, and we made it fun and playful. Maybe that's one of the reasons it felt so creative and fun and playful, and still does. My son loves saying to me, he's 11 now, what can I do to help Olio? And I'll say stuff like, all right, I want you to find me like the 10 countries that have the highest amount of food waste. And I'll give him like little reports and things to do. So that has its pros and cons, and it's not for everyone. And another thing we did is that we don't have an office. We've been remote first from day one, long before the pandemic. So we wanted to be able to drop our kids off at school, pick them up from school, volunteer for the lunch shift, and not feel like that was a compromise that we had to make because we had to travel to an office to be away from our home and our children. Mm-hmm. So that's one thing that has been hugely important. And we've recruited a team of people who have similar priorities, whether it's pets or it's an exercise routine or I don't know, a working farm or whatever other things that they value. So we have a huge amount, everyone works really hard, but we're really, really flexible company, really flexible. So I don't feel like I've had to make a trade-off, but I've also that means that we've never really very rarely compartmentalize and work is just woven into life, and it's very rarely that I'm not sort of like half working. which probably has some side effect in terms of trying to be present and make sure that there are times where I'm fully present for my husband and my son. To be honest, that was never really one of the biggest challenges for me. That part I found relatively straightforward. But my kid is really easy. People have different kids at different times. I'm sure he's going to be a nightmare of a teenager. Like, it's just, I've, knock on wood, it's been too good.
So wonderful to hear. And as you're seeing your child grow and thinking about the aspirations of where you'd like Olio to be in 5 or 10 years from now, can you share with us those aspirations or ambitions?
Until quite recently, 5 years ago, we would say things like we want 1 billion people to be using Olio to share our most precious resources so they don't go to waste by the end of the decade. I've stopped saying that because I don't know how we're going to get 1 billion people to use Olio. But what I really want to be able to do is to, for our platform, or any platform really, it doesn't matter, to for sharing, right, for secondhand, sort of to become the new normal as opposed to shopping and buying everything firsthand. We've got this huge problem. We've got this linear consumption model, which most Western countries have adopted. Everything is so disposable and everything is sadly like so cheap that we don't place a lot of value on the things that we have, and we overbuy and we overconsume, and we only realize a fraction of the useful value of the things that we have in our possession. And we're basically consuming as if we have 3 Earths. So I don't know if you know the concept of Earth Overshoot Day, but it's the day in the year, every year, in which collectively as humanity, the resources we consume will not be replenished. And any resources that are consumed past that day are net depletive to the planet. And when they started measuring it 40 years ago or 50 years ago, whatever, we were in equilibrium in that whatever we consumed was replenished every year. And so it was December 31st. And now we're at, I think, July 29th or July 27th or something like that. So we are collectively just getting closer and closer to the point at which we are not replenishing anything whatsoever. And I'm getting sidetracked here, but I just can't, this is just completely unsustainable. And, we've all got children and grandchildren who want to be able to live in a healthy habitat in the future. And I would hope that the only way we're going to stop that, put the brakes on that, is by putting the brakes on consumption. So I would hope that Olio can help, amongst many other sort of sharing and redistribution platforms, to redefine what consumption looks like, reinvent consumption so that we consume from what we already have always, and that is just the new normal, before we consume anything that's new and frankly virgin resources. And for that to be inspiring and aspirational for a whole generation of people. So that's like pretty big and bold. In order for that to actually happen, we need to make Olio a destination app that people want to open every single day, from tens and hundreds of millions of people to want to do that. And so that means we need to make Olio more useful to more people. And so we will continue at pace to add in new sections into the app, all around the themes of hyperlocal, sustainable, money saving, to just make it stickier and stickier and stickier, always around the theme of helping people to live a more sustainable life.
Beautiful. And for any aspiring entrepreneurs that may actually want to have a positive impact on sustainability, on our planet, what advice would you give them?
A couple things spring to mind. One, I strongly recommend that you find a co-founder. It's a very difficult journey, and it's much more difficult to do on your own. And most solo founders that I know really wish that they had a co-founder. So that's one thing. 2, make sure you solve a problem that is big enough and that your solution is a scalable solution. Because if it's a business, you're going to need to raise capital, unless somehow you're magically profitable from day one. Then you don't need my advice. I need your advice. And if you're going to persuade anyone to lend or invest money in your business, then you're going to need to be able to show them that there's a big opportunity and that your solution can scale in such a way to that it can unlock that opportunity efficiently. So a lot of times I see people picking something that's really small and can't scale, and that's going to be very difficult to raise funding for. And then third, I would say do it, because it's literally the most fun, joyful job in the world. And you can always go back and get a real job. And other people who don't try it will respect you and admire you for at least having the guts to try it. And it won't, you, if it doesn't work out, a lot of them don't, you won't be deemed as a failure. People will be just curious to understand what you learned. So I guess that would be my advice is if you can, go for it.
How can we create, in your view, a more joyful, sustainable world?
It's an excellent question. I'm a really big believer in gratitude, and I think cultivating gratitude as a practice amongst all of us, but also teaching our children how to do that is a way that hopefully collectively we can co-create more joy. Because humans respond in not their best self, not their and not their best, don't bring their best to the world when they're approaching the world from a place of scarcity. And a scarcity mindset causes people to do all kinds of things that aren't necessarily even conscious, which is a competitive approach to life, which is a divisive approach, which is et cetera, et cetera. And so the more we can remember that we are so lucky to be alive, that there's abundance all around us, and that we can be grateful for what we do have as opposed to feeling resentful for what we don't. And I do think that that is a mindset and therefore a practice and something that can be taught and collectively sort of shared or embraced. Then I think that's a way that hopefully we can all bring more joy. And I think then also that makes us cherish what we have, including our planet and our and the cities and landscapes within which we live. And then hopefully just the sustainability part will take care of itself, because we'll be so much more acutely aware of just how precious everything is.
Well, on those beautiful words, Saasha, I just want to thank you for your time, and everything you have shared has been truly, truly inspiring. I wish you continued success with Olio and everything that you're doing. And may you experience not only joy for yourself, your family, but also bring more joy to this world with everything that you do every day. So thank you again for taking the time to be with us.
Thank you so much for having me and for your kind words. And thank you for spreading joy.